So, Corpse Party was first released on Japanese computers back in 1996. The same year, my parents were doing the Macarena shortly before bringing awesomeness to the world. And the game was completely remade for the PC with a redone story and better graphics in 2006. The same year, Iran was testing missiles capable of reaching Israel. And that remake got remade again with even better graphics released in North America back in 2011. The same year that the US military allowed people to be openly gay. And the enhanced PSP version ended up being the base for a remaster, with various tweaks and quality of life improvements released for the 3DS in North America back in 2016, the same year that a gorilla was shot in a Cincinnati zoo, permanently shifting meme culture from being about slapping top and bottom text on an image to experimental deep-fried randomness. And from my recollection, this is the only game I could think of that was remade twice before being remastered. Well, actually the footage you're looking at is from the remaster of the 3DS game, so it was actually remastered again in 2021, the same year that Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion were scissoring at the Grammys. But even though Corpse Party as a series has been going downhill with every sequel, I still feel like the first game holds up as a masterpiece with a story so batshit insane and entertaining that you'd think you were playing through a Stephen King novel. So the game's plot begins with one of the main characters, Ayumi, telling a spooky story to her friends inside their classroom. And it revolves around a tragedy that happened in a school named Heavenly Host Elementary, back in the 1970s, where 3 children were murdered by their teacher according to a testimony by the only survivor, a 7-year-old girl named Sachiko. Afterwards, because one of their classmates, Mayu, is transferring to another school the next day, the main characters all decide to do a dumb ritual that Ayumi read off the internet, where each person chants a phrase and rips apart a paper doll in order to stay connected forever. But little did they know that performing that innocent-looking ritual would cause an earthquake, teleporting them to a haunted version of Heavenly Host Elementary, with multiple dimensions bearing different areas to explore. Naturally, only 3 or so of the main characters end up in the same dimension, and it's up to you, the player, to solve puzzles and avoid doing anything to risk losing your life by finding a way to rendezvous with the other classmates while finding a way to escape as fast as possible. So the main characters of this game are Satoshi, the preppy who's probably gay but all of his female classmates love him, Ayumi, an occultist junkie and class president who always acts like she knows what she's doing, despite leading all of the main characters to their potential doom by believing what she reads on the internet all the time, Yoshiki, a former delinquent who always keeps Ayumi in check and is actually one of my favorite characters in the whole game. Yuka, Satoshi's younger sister who is 14 but looks and acts like she's 7. Naomi, a girl who has been good friends with Satoshi since junior high and might be bisexual. Seiko, Naomi's perverted lesbian best friend who gropes her at every opportunity possible. Mayu, a girl who's part of the theater club and was supposed to transfer to another school before getting turned into Calimeks. And Morishige, the best friend of Mayu and a fellow member of the theater club who ends up liking Mayu a little more on the inside than he does on the outside. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention Ms. Yui, the teacher who's like an older sister to Ayumi and is well liked by her other students for being a good mentor. Despite being based on anime stereotypes, the high schoolers all act very realistic for being trapped inside a haunted school, and not everyone gets a happy ending. In Chapter 1, for example, it's implied that Seiko and Naomi have feelings for each other, but they go their separate ways after Seiko hears Yuka's voice, and leaves Naomi to almost die from the ghost of a nurse inside the infirmary. Anyway, Seiko, obviously being dumber than a sack of potatoes, wasn't gonna find monkeypox in a pride parade, much less where Yuka's voice was coming from. And Naomi starts an argument with her about all that, about why she was wrong for abandoning her, etc., etc., which is all a perfect example of how most same-sex couples break up anyway. But the queer coding for Seiko doesn't just stop with her wanting to butter up her pooper and being choked to death in an emotionally abusive relationship. In fact, during a flashback in the opening of Chapter 4, Seiko was groping her younger sister in the bathroom after offering her some of Mama's milk, and therefore making them the ideal couple according to Japanese perverts. Morishige is a side character who gets sprinkled throughout each chapter, and when I first played through Corpse Party on the PSP back in 2012, I never really put much thought into him. I just assumed that he was supposed to be the nerdy loner stereotype, who acted like a spurg when interacting with the other characters, and seemed a bit too desensitized for everyone's comfort. But after re-experiencing the story again, and I don't know for the life of me why I didn't realize it sooner, but Morishige is a degenerate necrophile. And in Chapter 5, when he's scrolling through the pictures he took on his flip phone, and the ghost of Mayu tells him to stop looking at her body. He wasn't just flipping out over the fact that she died and it was too late to save her. And he wasn't just flipping out over being caught looking at the dead, splattered body of his best friend. He was also flipping out because he was unknowingly eye-fucking the dead, rotten body of his best friend, and being more obsessed with his fetish than protecting the person that mattered to him the most, forcing the other characters to leave him behind like a bar of soap at a Smash tournament. Then you have Satoshi, who's supposed to be the main character, but doesn't really get anything done outside of leaving behind his younger sister due to being transported to another dimension. Sort of like how I pretend to transport myself to another dimension so all the baby mamas I sip and skip on at the club don't bother me, and I'm very sorry, ladies, but if you get mad at me for quote-unquote using you for sex, then you need to either A, get your cute butts back home to bed on time, or B, have the ability to jog faster than me. Cause I have a life to live and I'm not wrong ending myself into becoming a stepdad. Anyway, so Yuka, Satoshi's sister, gets left behind and teams up with a 17-year-old boy named Kizami for a few chapters, because he claims to have lost his younger sister only for her to realize that he is a homicidal maniac, who shivved his younger brother and kicked him down a hole to the first floor of the building they were in. Kizami never had a younger sister, but it's heavily implied through a flashback that he wishes he had one for reasons I'm sure you can figure out. So he goes mental, and you have to play as Yuka to run away from him, and honestly, the game from this point on becomes about as tedious as crossing the United States border through Latin America. You just keep pushing forward while a bunch of bullshit happens around you, and by the end of your journey there's a t-shirt booth. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So, once you get to the last chapter of the game, it's revealed by Naho, the owner of the occult blog Ayumi was a fan of, that the ritual she posted was intentionally giving out the wrong instructions so that you would mess it up, making Ayumi just another victim of fake news orchestrated by a sociopathic woman pretending to be a journalist, which is something that I'm sure we've all experienced at some point. And in a twist, it wasn't the teacher who killed those 3 kids, it was Sachiko, the lone survivor who used her black magic witch powers to manipulate the flowers for Algernon type of mental regression that the teacher has been experiencing for a while so that he could kidnap and tie up those 3 students, trap them in the basement, and have Sachiko murder them herself, while the teacher cries in the corner like a modern Star Wars fanboy. And even though Ayumi and Yoshiki made it back to their world alive, they make the decision to go back and rescue the others out of kindness. Throughout the whole story, Naomi is constantly upset about how she had no recollection of hanging her best friend Seiko on a noose. So to ease her paranoia, Satoshi shows her the text that Seiko was going to send before dying. And because they were both vulvar gurglers who are like totally labia gabia, chiz for life, lol, Naomi's anxiety goes away instantly knowing that Seiko didn't die being mad at her. And after 2 hours of puzzle bosses, appeasing spirits, and collecting mandatory items, you appease the main spirit, Sachiko, which miraculously transports the main characters who survived this whole ordeal back to the school with all the associated memories of the 4 main characters who died being wiped away from their memories like they never existed. While the overall plot of the game might seem a bit contrived, and the lore of how the haunted school works is explained by ramming the player in the head with constant exposition dumps, and interacting with other beings trapped alongside with you, it never got annoying for me because the game always gave me plenty of space to find out clues for myself, and it always kept me guessing. Whether it was the notes left behind by the people who died, the illustrations that would pop up sometimes when examining things, interacting with NPCs to get a glimpse at how other people were suffering, and looking at all the seemingly innocuous differences between each dimension of the school that the main characters are trapped in, it really created the atmosphere for what I consider to be my favorite horror game ever. So the gameplay of Corpse Party is very unique for an indie horror game, especially for the time it came out in. It has its roots in RPG Maker, so there's really nothing too complicated to master here. In each chapter, you control a party of 2 or 3 different people that each have a health bar. There's no battle system, no magic, no level up system either, so the bulk of what you'll be doing is finding hidden items, solving puzzles, and surviving boss encounters by completing puzzles. There are 5 chapters that you need to complete with the chance of getting a wrong end if you don't do everything correctly, and the chances of you getting a wrong end become higher the more you progress, and some of them are very interesting. You can die from being sliced by a piano wire, cannibalism, being buried alive, being shoved down a flight of stairs, proving that even in an old fictional Japanese elementary school from the 1970s, banning the sale of automatic weapons does not solve anything. And if I recall correctly, Sachiko was able to get away with murdering those students with just a simple pair of scissors, so there you go. One thing that really adds to the experience though is the music. I hope whoever was in charge of making the soundtrack got a raise, because whoever was playing the violins for the music in Chapter 2 and the bass guitar for the music of the second building in Chapter 5 were both pouring every ounce of spooky, swingy, funky soul into it. Really, the whole soundtrack is a treat to listen to, but those tracks I pointed out in particular really made me want to party with corpses. So to wrap up this review, Corpse Party is an underrated masterpiece. The characters are written very well, the plot, while a bit obtuse, is engaging and had me hooked all the way through. The gameplay, while rudimentary, isn't the main focus and supplements the events of the story fairly well. And all in all, my favorite part was when Satoshi said, "It's corpse partying time," because it really spoke to me. So I'll see you all in the next review. Peace out.